Manipulating photos might not be the thing that you would say is the hallmark of a UI designer, but back when I started, we were all using Photoshop. And in fact, Photoshop was one of the very first pieces of design software I used back in the 90s. And I cut my teeth on design by manipulating photos and photoshopping things and making jokes with my friends with my Photoshop skills. So I have a lot of dormant Photoshop skills that occasionally come into play as a UI designer and someone designing interfaces and products and things like that. So I'm gonna show you one quick example of a time when I needed to use my Photoshop skills for a recent project. And then I'll show you just a few little tips and tricks in case you ever find yourself in the need for doing some photo manipulation. So first of all, I wanna show you this quick little animation that I did for the SmartLine intro. I did this in InVision Studio and exported this video. So let's just check this out really quickly. Tap the button, open up, you got all these things flying out, and not the smoothest animation in the world, but just kind of I wanted to show what could be possible with all of these different little pieces. So they're kind of floating around. I've just got some stuff kind of happening. So if I bring this down here and just kind of scrub the timeline, I'm just moving the XY coordinates on a lot of these different pieces. And that is not possible without each one of these being an individual asset. So I'm hiding everything. I scaled everything down, hiding it on layers below that phone. And then as the timeline goes, everything's kind of shooting out and scaling up at slightly different speeds. Second line for your phone, the idea of that one side is for personal things, one side is for work. So when we got started, there were a lot of assets already created for the GoDaddy rebrand, and this 3D model was one of those things. But I didn't have access to the 3D model, and I didn't have access to the person who created it. It might have been outsourced, but either way, I had these flat images to work with, and you can't really animate a flat image unless you just make it appear or you slide it in. But I wanted to do something a little bit more fun and immersive with this. So I dusted off my old Photoshop skills. And by the way, if you don't have Photoshop, it's totally fine. You may find yourself in the future needing to do some of this, or maybe you have Photoshop or you'll have it in the future and you need a few little tips and tricks to just do a few simple little things. Well, even to get started, you can download a free 30-day trial of Photoshop. So if you want to follow along or do any of this and you don't have Photoshop, you can get it free for 30 days just to kind of spin the wheels and kick the tires, whatever you want to do with it. So here we go. This is the image that I was provided. I had this image for the SmartLine app, and I wanted all of these little pieces as individual things. So this would be quite simple inside of a 3D tool. You could just isolate each image, export it as a transparent ping, and you would have 20 different images, and that would be it. But I emailed people, I emailed other designers, I emailed product managers, and no one could quite point me in the right direction. It's a big corporate organization, and kind of finding that right person, it was just hard to do. And I never got connected with them. So I decided to be resourceful, take matters into my own hands, and clip out all of these little pieces by hand in Photoshop. We're gonna do that right now. And I wanna point out here, I'm gonna hide some of these layers. This is the actual file. So I'm gonna bring in my background here, and you can see here's my phone, here's my popsicle, here's my beach ball, here's my leaf, suitcase, everything kind of on its own little layer. So in order to do that, we simply need to start off. I'm gonna put all this stuff in a group and just kind of hide it, okay? And I don't really need that background layer. So I'm gonna duplicate this layer. Photoshop is a little odd in the fact that you have to hit Command J to duplicate a layer, but that way we don't tamper with our original layer. We just wanna leave that there. All right, we're gonna start with something simple here, and we're gonna grab this little ball. Well, inside of Photoshop, you have a couple of selection mechanisms. You have the rectangular marquee tool, you've got your polygon, lasso, and it lets you select pieces of a photo or something, and then you can pull it away and you can manipulate those little pixels. So what we're gonna do is click and hold this marquee tool, and we're gonna select elliptical marquee, and I'm just gonna draw a circle right over, let me zoom in a little bit before I do this. The thing you wanna know about clipping photos, clipping objects out of photos, you wanna get as little of the background as possible. So notice how I'm not going to the very edge like this. I'm not going to the very edge and including these little teal pixels in here. We really wanna be like, let me get my regular lasso tool. We wanna be like right in this area, right in there without any of the outer stuff. So we're going to select this again, and we're just gonna draw a simple little circle. And then just kinda, I'm glancing around at all the edges, making sure that's pretty good. So once I have that selected, I'm gonna hit Command J again, Control J if you're on Windows, and let's hide these layers. And the best thing to do is test it against a black background. So I'm gonna click this little icon down here and add a solid color, change it to black. Sometimes if you test it on a white background, you might have some artifacts that you missed that didn't get clipped out well. So if you test it on a black background, you'll make sure that your clips are nice. All right, so there's our ball. We can just double click onto this and say, all right, there's our ball, hooray. Okay, so now, we're gonna draw a circle right here. Make sure we don't include the popsicle background. We just want inside. I'm gonna hold Shift to add to the selection. You can see the little plus icon popping up. I'm gonna hold Shift again, add to the selection some more. And I'm really just doing this to get those rounded corners. Hold Shift one more time to get this rounded area. And that should be pretty good. Now, I'm gonna switch to the polygon lasso, which is right here. And I'm just gonna hold Shift and click and connect these selections. You only hold Shift once while you're starting this off. And I'm trying to just kind of use these flat edges here to get it selected in place. So now I've added all of that polygon stuff. We're gonna do the same basic thing here. Hold Shift, and fun fact, you can hold Option to remove part of the selection, Command Z, and hold Shift again right here. I'm just gonna connect it to the edge of that, and right in here. We can always change this later. We can modify it later. But that should be pretty good, and we wanna make sure that we're not on our ball layer, we're on our actual image layer. So I'm gonna hit Command J again, and now we have our popsicle. So let's put this up here. Might as well go ahead and group these, put this in a pieces layer or pieces group. Then I can again test this on a black background. Say, okay, there's my popsicle. And you might notice that you have a little bit of a hard edge right there. Sometimes you can just kind of shave off like half a pixel, like something like this, and it'll kind of feather it out a bit. Make sure the popsicle layer is selected, delete, zoom out, see if that looks a little bit better. And that's pretty much what I did for every single little piece of this SmartLine animation. And eventually, once you get done with all of the pieces, all I did was select both of these, right click and hit quick export as PNG. And let's just throw these onto the desktop into our quick export Photoshop folder, open, and let's go to our desktop and let's check these out. So there we go, little popsicle and ball. Now we can just, whether it's Figma or Studio, this is the thing I'm about to show you next. We can grab both of these things, just drag them in, and all of a sudden we have the ability to throw these isolated objects on top of our design. Okay, so now what if we wanted to create something a little bit more complex? Something like clipping hair out of a background and integrating it with like a design. Well, this is gonna require a little bit more of advanced photo manipulation, but it's not too difficult. Just take it step by step and I'll show you how to do it. First of all, we're gonna go to Unsplash and I'm gonna search for hair. And you can see there's lots and lots of hair photos. I wanted to find one that was kind of on a solid background, and you could really use any of these. We could even have tried to do that one. But I downloaded this one because it was just here, it was first, and I went with it. So, and there we go. Okay, so just like that other image, we're gonna make a copy of it. Let me change that a little bit. Why don't we go ahead and make these large icons just so we can see what we're doing a little bit better. So I'm gonna duplicate this by hitting Command J. That way we just have a copy and we're not kind of damaging the original version. So what we wanna do here, we're gonna go to Channels right here, which is usually right beside Layers. You can also go to Windows, Channels, make sure that's showing. And what we're gonna do is click on this and see which one of this provides the most contrast between the hair and the background. We want it to be almost like a black on white image, and blue looks like it's pretty close. So I am going to duplicate this channel, which is a little different than duplicating a layer. Just call it blue copy, that's fine. And I want to show only the blue copy. Now I'm gonna actually play around with the curves or the levels, the contrast on this actual channel. So you can open levels by doing Command L, and you can open curves by doing Command M. It's really a similar way to like edit the black and white of a photo. I tend to prefer curves, but sometimes levels might be a little bit easier to understand. The far left is the blackness, and the far right is the whiteness. So you can see our white is not quite, it's not white completely until we get to about right there. So we're definitely gonna want complete white, and then we're gonna bring in this black until the hair and the background has a nice contrast. Like right in here. We're looking for a good contrast between the hair and the background, even in some of these areas. So it might go a little darker. You kind of have to experiment with this. Don't worry about the image, that we're just kind of getting a guideline here. And then you can even pull the midpoint in different directions to make it a little bit different. Something like that looks pretty good. It's kind of like we've created this posterized effect. So now all we're gonna do is Command or Control click, if you're on Windows, Command click this blue copy layer, and it's just gonna create a bunch of selection of all of the little details here. Once we have that selection, we can hide the blue copy. Actually, just click RGB. We wanna show the RGB layer. And then we're just gonna hide that blue copy because we don't really need it anymore. Now we're gonna go to Layers, and with this layer selected, and with this, all this weird marquee stuff selected, before we do anything else, we want to invert the selection. And just hit Command Shift I, and that will just select the opposite of everything. So once you do that, we're gonna hit this mask icon right here. Boom. Okay, so now you can see that we have this transparent background, and we have a lot of the hair and everything is perfectly cut out of the background. And so if we're gonna test this, we could choose this background layer, hit solid color here again, and then add in a really dark color. It looks kind of weird because we're not quite done yet. If we hold Option while we click the mask, it'll show us a true black and white version of that mask. Then what we can do, we're gonna hit the B key to pull up the brush tool. The brush tool has an opacity of 50% by default. Usually I like to bump that up to 100. And then if you right click, you can change the size of your brush tool. And so if it's right in here, and watch what happens. I'm drawing, it's important to note, I'm drawing on this mask. So I'm drawing white on this mask. See how feathery that edge is? Because the hardness is set to 0. If I went up to 100, watch the same brush is kind of making this hard edge. So that's fine when you're dealing with all this internal stuff. What we're doing is we want, the white is gonna show everything of the image. So for example, if we made this like a red color, see how the arm is showing through? So hold Option and click that mask right there. And you can see that because it's not white, the background's showing through. So option click that again. Now you can see the skin tones coming back in. So this is a little bit of a process, but it's a really quick way, relatively speaking. And I might adjust my hardness. I'm gonna adjust the size, and I'll just start kind of brushing this in. So just so we don't all go mad watching me brush all of this in, I will now fast forward everything I'm doing here, so you don't have to watch me brush it, but just know that I'm brushing white over everything that we want to keep. And you can brush black over everything that you want to remove. But because we've selected the blue channel, a copy of that blue channel, we've already gotten really what that does is it collects all of those little hairs on the background, separates the hair from the background. Okay, so that is pretty decent here. We're gonna hold option and click this again and kind of check this out. So now let's check it again on a black background. So you can see there's still a little bit of a glow that's happening. Like it didn't get this full background, but that's okay. It's pretty minimal and it kind of adds a little bit of a glow to the image. I'm not too worried about that. So what I want to do is just test it on some different backgrounds just to make sure that it looks like the hair and all of these little pieces like right in here. A lot of this stuff is really tricky to cut out manually. You can see like even right here, I actually tried to do a brush right there, but it's probably too much. So we can go back to this mask and turn it to the black color. And as long as, let's go with like a 50% opacity. We can just kind of fade this out a little. Let's crank the hardness down. You can see that we actually have quite a bit. I didn't realize how much of this background is still coming through. So what you can do also is Command M and then just kind of crank down on this mask, add a little more black to the mask, and that will kind of clean it up a bit. So then we can kind of just fade this section out a little bit. Option, click that again. And if that's not looking okay, you can just use your polygon tool the same way that we did on that SmartLine stuff. And then do option delete will fill this black. And we might just want to soften that up a little bit, just soften the edge. The worst thing you can do is have these hard cuts in like a hair scenario. Anytime you see that, it's kind of a mark of someone who is not really doing a great job with their photoshopping. And so even up close, this looks a little bit choppy, but when you zoom out to 100% and you're playing around with different colors, like it's a pretty decent looking Photoshop job. So now that we've done that and it looks decent on a transparent background, now what I'm gonna do is right click this, quick export as PNG, and we will call this hair, put it on our desktop, save it. Let's call this hair 2 because I've already done this one time. So we're gonna open up Figma and we're gonna grab hair 2 and we're gonna pull it in just like this. It'll take it just a second to come in. There it is. All right, so we exported this entire thing. If we wanted it to be a little bit smaller, we could move it over to like right there and then kind of go to our rectangular marquee. And then we could crop this like right in there, image, crop, and then we could do an export from there. Quick export as PNG, call it hair 2 again and replace it. Let's just delete that one, grab hair 2 again. That way it's just like in a little bit better of a container. And now we have a lot of flexibility with what we can do with this inside of our design tool. And this is really gonna work best for marketing sites, maybe the occasional There's stuff you can do with it now inside of Figma because it is an isolation. You can actually play around with the background color inside of Figma and it's still gonna work the same way that it was working in Photoshop. So what I did to create this, you can see this kind of fading out here. Well, you could also fade that out in Photoshop. I actually did this inside of Figma with a utility gradient. But if you wanted to create that inside of Photoshop, so what I'm gonna do is duplicate this whole layer just because I wanna save what I've done. And then we can, as long as this is black on white, we can go to the gradient tool right here, and the gradient selection is right here. So we're gonna go foreground to transparent, and we're just gonna draw a gradient right in there. So if you wanted to get rid of the entire midsection because that might not be what you wanted, you could fade it out kind of anywhere along in here and it would be a total fade out. And you could test that with a background color. So maybe you wanted something like, I'm just adding a gradient over and over and over. But sometimes you might not want to do that because you can also just do it inside of Figma and it gives you a little bit more flexibility to work with. So let's go ahead and just kind of recreate this. So I've got a Google font here called Playfair Display. It's just kind of like a nice, I'm using the black italic, which is kind of a nice serif font. We'll do a MacBook Pro size. We'll make this one a little smaller. Just gonna select the same color. And maybe I'll change it just a little, just so it's different. Put that in there. So this is just to kind of reiterate, this would be good to create some kind of like marketing collateral or a hero image for a website, or maybe just like a big call out, something like interesting for a marketing site. And you can really just do a lot more when you have this thing cut out. So what I did here, I want this to be cropped by the text, like right in there. Right in there. We're gonna group this and then we're gonna create a mask with our text by hitting Control-Command-M. So now we have this mask, and now let's just position this like in an interesting position. Like probably want to see the face and a little bit more of the hair. So I'm gonna we could really put this anywhere. Just kind of looking for an interesting place to put it. Maybe right in there. So what I did on the other one, I'm gonna layer some of this. I'm gonna take this photo and Option drag it out of the group. So now it's actually, this one is behind everything, but it does look like it's still in the same place. But I'm also going to grab the hair text and Option drag it out, Control-Command-M to delete that mask. So now we have this white text beneath the mask, which is just kind of creating a duplication. And then we have the image. So we just have a duplicate of the image and the text, like two of each. So this would be the hair masked, and this would be the hair unmasked. Reduce the opacity of this until we can kind of get that cool effect. And if I wanted to move these around, I would just click the hair and the hair layers and move them jointly around to see what was like an interesting combination. So maybe something like right in there, you can get the fingers and the R. But then again, so we still have this, the picture is just kind of ending right there and it looks a little bit odd. So what we can do is just draw a rectangle, and we're gonna select this color in the background, change it to linear. It's automatically gonna give us this kind of utility gradient. So I'm gonna put the solid color down here and the transparent color up here. And then I can just play with, where do I want this to fade out? Kind of at an angle. Maybe it's at an angle to kind of line up the hair. And again, we could have done that in Photoshop, but actually the angle gradient is messing that up a bit. Let's go in and edit the linear gradient just to be straight up and down. Right in there. There we go. So you might not think that you're going to use this technique very often, but I just want to lastly show you a designer that I really admire. A friend of mine, Ben Johnson. You can find his Dribbble profile, B Johnson, and just look at any of his work, and he is usually playing around with some type of image isolation. See, look how cool that looks. This guy is just kind of clipped out on top of this text. And it just creates a really, really interesting visual, like overlaying the images on the text. He may or may not be creating these ripples inside of Photoshop and bringing it over. A lot of this work might be easier to do fully in Photoshop, but you can see he's even cropping these clipped out photos in kind of interesting ways. He's using the luminosity blend mode trick that we covered in our last lesson, but lots and lots of different variety with how he plays around with his marketing images. I mean, these aren't fully clipped out, but just kind of placing these images on top of text and really creating these really interesting types of layouts. Like, check this out. This is just a lot of work, a lot of really cool grid work, typography, and he's cut out this flower, he's cut out these images, and it really creates an awesome look. He may or may not have cut this out. He might just be only using the luminosity blend mode, but then you can see here he's done the similar thing that we just did with our hair cut out, and he's cut out this leaf. So he's just doing a lot of this clipping work, but it really adds to the visuals. And it just gives it this very meticulous, well-crafted look. And I think all of Ben's work is really unique in that way because he uses this technique often. So for homework, I don't think you really need to recreate everything that we did here, but I would definitely encourage you to download Photoshop 30-day free trial, or there's other programs like Affinity Photo, which I haven't used as much, but there are other Photoshop type programs that you may want to check out. Download some images from Unsplash and just play around with selecting things and removing it and just kind of manipulating photos. You might create more possibility than you would have imagined not doing that. So best of luck with your newfound photo manipulation skills.